Okay, so we've just read that section together, so now it's time just to work through the activities. I'm literally going to just talk you through, and you'll have time to pause and see what you can find for yourselves. Okay, so it says over here in the grey. Now remember, grey means it's something that's not only within this article, but something that we can use later on, either in other learning or other styles of response, like when we're working as journalists. So it says, summarize the 1960s experiments. What did they do? How did listeners respond? Okay, so in a minute when you pause, you're going to be rereading this section for that information. Okay, now towards the end of this paragraph, so this first paragraph on this page, there's a word that's repeated that's been used consistently now within this section. So what word is that? Okay, and it's also talking about being socially stigmatized. Okay, which is a really good expression. The vocabulary around the word stigmatized is really good for us in this topic area. So what is the idea? What does it mean? Okay, so socially stigmatized accent represents the idea that some people are. So I want you to copy and complete that statement in a minute. And then last but not least, down here, we've got the idea that these attitudes are linked to both positive and negative outcome in the second section. So actually, sometimes bias can be positive as well as negative. Okay, so what's the positive outcome for people? In the second section, what's the negative outcome? Okay, and then towards the end of that paragraph, it's got this beautiful verb phrase, perpetuating the erroneous belief. Wow. Okay, this verb phrase reminds us that this writer isn't afraid to make her opinion clear. She doesn't hide her opinion. She's very confident in what she believes, so she's not afraid to put it out there. But what does this phrase actually mean? So in a minute, you can stop and look up the words and see if you can paraphrase this verb phrase in your own words, perpetuating the erroneous belief. So you can look up the words and put it into your own words. Okay, press pause and see you in a minute with the outcome. Okay, so what did we get? Okay, so if we go back to where we started, what were the experiments? What were they doing in the 1960s? Okay, they call them, okay, the experiment was presenting subjects with different guises. Okay, in other words, one person would perform the same task or say the same thing, but change the accent. So people were being invited to respond based on the accent. Okay, and how did they respond? Well, sadly, they responded differently when faced with different accents and revealed a particular bias. So, for example, they were judging people as good if they spoke with particular accents. If they spoke with other accents, they were being judged as criminals. They were listening to some people and judging them as intelligent and educated. They were listening to others and judging them as being less intelligent or less educated. So, simply based on the sound of a person's voice, people were making these strong responses. Okay, and at the end of that paragraph, then what's the word that's repeated that's been a thread of an idea running through the section? Yep, you've got it, is biases. So sadly, people are responding to others with a bias, either for or against them based on how they speak. Okay, now remember, we've used the word arbitrary anesthetic before. Really, these biases are not based on any factual information. Okay, in this experiment, the guy wasn't stood there saying my IQ is 167, therefore I'm intelligent. He was just speaking a particular way and they were judging him to be intelligent. So these were arbitrary decisions based simply on how somebody sounds. It would be a bit like the 1960s beauty pageants. We're just going to parade a group of people out in front of you. You can judge them solely based on how they look. Now, we realize that that's archaic. We don't do that anymore. So actually, the fact that this still is ongoing, that people are still being judged because of the way they speak, seems really sad. And that's what this writer is so passionate about, so drawing attention to the fact that this is unfair and unreasonable, that we still judge people simply based on how they sound. Okay, and that leads into this lovely phrase that our writer uses, the socially stigmatized accent. Whew. Okay, so to stigmatize somebody means to mark them out negatively. If you're stigmatized, people think badly of you. Okay, so if you've got a socially stigmatized accent, it means that people make negative social judgments based on how you sound. So we've seen this before in other articles, you know, that the working class accent is often socially stigmatized. It's seen as being an indicator of poor education. That we're often, remember from Blood Brothers at GCSE, that Edward has a socially privileged accent. Mickey has a socially stigmatized accent that he is judged as being a potential criminal, as being less intelligent based on the way he sounds. So socially stigmatized accents represent the idea that some people are negatively judged and marked out because of the way they sound. Okay, now in that second paragraph, it talks about positive, negative outcomes. Okay, so the positive, and it's okay that we can have two opinions, two responses to this issue, because that just shows the complexity that we're looking at when we talk about the relationship between accent and social identity. It's not an easy topic. Okay, so what's good about it? Pride. I'm really proud of where I come from. I'm really proud of how I sound. I'm really proud of my background. So for some people, their accent is a source of great pride. Okay, they're really proud to be who they are, and they're really proud of where they're from. Okay, so pride can be a positive bias, okay, a positive way of embracing how we sound. But it says here for others a secret source of shame. Okay, sadly, then, because of the attitudes that people encounter, they become ashamed of how they sound. So much so that they believe that they have to change the way they speak in order to become accepted. Okay, so the negative outcome is shame, the positive outcome is pride. And then she ends with this powerful phrase, perpetuating the erroneous belief. Okay. And okay, brilliant. So what do we look up? Perpetuating. Perpetuating means to keep something going, an ongoing cycle. And erroneous means it's a lie. So she's saying that sadly, in society, judging non-standard speakers as being unintelligent, incorrect, ugly, common sounding accents is actually perpetuating a lie. It's keeping a lie going that because I sound a particular way, I must be a particular type of person. And that's what this writer wants to challenge. Okay, so just make a note if your answers were correct and change any that weren't. Brilliant. Okay, so you can see we've got our second subheading here, if you can't beat them. So these subheadings are a little bit colloquial, a little bit non-standard. She's using actually well-known phrases. Yeah, if you can't beat them, how would we end that? ... Join them to introduce this next section of the article. It says here, this ingrained linguistic prejudice has led to studies showing that people consistently rate those with standard accents or prestige accents as being more competent, intelligent, effective communicators, and better suited to high-status professional jobs. So these match Geyser experiments in the 1960s, this is the sort of conclusions people were coming to. Somebody was stood in front of them speaking with a standard accent, and they were ticking a box that says, oh, this person's intelligent, this person is competent, I trust this person must be a professional. Whereas those with non-standard accents are often rated as better employed in lower status, less desirable jobs. So they're making the inverse judgment of people with non-standard accents, okay? They said that they would be better off doing maybe manual work, okay? The jobs that the professionals wouldn't do. People consistently rate those with standard accents or prestige accents as being better suited to high-status professional jobs. These findings can have a major impact on our working lives and careers, especially if you speak with a non-standard accent. A recent ITV survey on the UK language attitudes found that over a quarter of Britons feel they have encountered accent discrimination. The more people change their accents to fit in with prevailing attitudes and stereotypes, the more these views are reinforced. Okay, so you've got some tasks to do around the screen, so I'm just going to let you pause. And the blue task is a paraphrase task, so just reread the section and complete that sentence with the right information. And the grey, it's asking you to pick out some of the negative prejudices towards non-standard accents and some of the positive prestige positive prestige linked to standard. Okay, pause and find your answers. Okay, so a quarter of Britons feel that they have been discriminated against or that they've been discriminated in the workplace because of the way they speak. Therefore, they have changed the way they speak. They've changed their accents to fit in. So it is the idea of accommodation. It is the idea that people will adapt the way they speak for certain situations. But the problem here is that's not right because they're changing for the wrong reasons. They're changing in response to discrimination. So rather than changing the people with the wrong attitude so they no longer discriminate, the victims, so to speak, the quarter of Britons that face that discrimination feel pressure to change. Okay, ingrained linguistic prejudices. Standard accents are linked to being, okay, intelligent, competent, better suited to high status professional jobs. Better suited to, professional jobs. It repeats that idea because that's a really important one. Whereas non-standard accents are linked to being linked to low status jobs, less desirable jobs. So we can do inversion here. So if standard English is intelligent, a lack of intelligence. So again, it's this seeming dichotomy that's saying on one hand, we've got all these positive attributes if you have a standard accent, a prestige accent, and on the other hand, all these negative attributes if you speak with a non-standard accent. So working class, local accents come under this umbrella term. Reminds us of Bernstein and those attitudes about restricted and elaborate code that we looked at last week. Okay, so this has had some real life impacts. For example, there are fewer academics who've kept their regional accents because students somehow just don't find them as effective if they have one and often rate them accordingly, regardless of their actual expertise. Even in job interviews, it's easy for an interviewer to fall into the trap of believing that a person's mere accent is enough to indicate their ability. A surprising 80% of employers admit they do discriminate based on accent, according to recent research. In extreme, though not uncommon cases, people have lost their jobs thanks to these prevailing attitudes, even when their accent has had no bearing on the actual work. With such a linguistic minefield to navigate, is it any wonder people consider making their accents over for an easier life? Okay, guys, so over here, real life impacts. You've got to find 3 real life impacts, okay, of this attitude towards the way people speak. Down here in the green, which metaphor does the writer introduce in the closing interrogative of this section? What are the connotations of this image? What reason does it suggest for why people are changing their accents? Can you link it to the subheading if you can't beat them? So just pause, reread, and complete your tasks. Okay, guys, so 3 real life impacts. People are losing their jobs. People are not being employed. People are finding that even academics are changing the way they speak. Okay, the metaphor that's introduced, the linguistic minefield. Now, minefield is a war metaphor. It reminds us of bombs that were hidden under the surface of the ground. So as people would walk across, they'd be blown up. So it's this idea that there's so much hidden bias against you based on the way you speak that it's a really difficult area to navigate. Okay, so what reasons does it suggest for why people are changing their accents? So people are changing their accents because it's going to make their lives easier. Okay, rather than wait for society to change, for these erroneous lies about accents and behavior to change, the person with the accent's going to change. Okay, so that would be like saying to somebody with a racist mindset, you stay thinking that way. We're just going to ask the person with a different coloured skin to change. Now, in that instance, we would know that would be stupid. There is no possible way that we would accept that in our society. And yet, accents are still one of those last areas of permissible discrimination. Okay, so that's the tension within this article. Okay, our final subheading, easier said than done, and isn't that true? Before you call that speech and dialect coach, consider that even if you do successfully change your accent, it may not matter. Experiments have shown that listeners can still have problems cognitively processing information from a speaker when their accents don't seem to match up with their perceived background. Now, this is quite a subtle cyclical link here, because remember when we began this article, she mentions Tony Blair and George Osborne, 2 guys, 2 MPs who changed their accents and people mocked them for it. They thought they were inauthentic. So this paragraph is just a more technical explanation of that process, that people have cognitive problems processing information when the speaker doesn't match up with their accent. In other words, we're looking for a cohesion between what a person looks like and how they sound. Okay, so I just want you to go through the green activities on the side here, and we'll have a look at your answers together in a minute. Okay, brilliant. So really, these were activities just about spotting your subordinate conjunctions, okay, to create complex sentences. So if, that, okay, are being used in this section to create complex sentence structures, because these are more complicated ideas. Okay, and just moving towards the end then. In one test, subjects were shown 2 different pictures, one of a Caucasian person, one of an Asian person. The same audio of a native speaker talking in standard American English was played as the participants looked at each image. Subjects had significantly more trouble understanding the speech when looking at the Asian speaker. Some even went so far as to identify non-existent foreign accent, showing how social biases bleed into our cognitive interpretations of language. So it's clear that there are social factors that play into how job candidates and employees are judged, even if you end up sounding posher than the Queen. Okay, lovely. So just pause it there and work through those activities. And finally, guys, I just want you to do this bit independently. So read this last paragraph by yourself and just make a final statement or set of notes in terms of which sentence shows that the writer believes the solution is not changing the way we speak,